Hi, this is Jeff with the INTJ equation, and I'm joined by Zeon, aka Bob, once again, and also Lan. They are both ENTJs, and Zeon is kind of our resident Discord astrologer.
Hey Jeff, how you doing?
Pretty good. So we're gonna get into my birth chart today. So we're just gonna go and look at all the aspects of my natal chart and kind of show what's INTJ-ish and what isn't, and kind of see if we can point out some correlations and see where this goes.
Right. All right, Jeff. And before we start, is there anything in particular you want to look at yourself?
I like we were talking about like the north and south node. That's what really struck me as
Hmm.
like INTJ-ish. It definitely sounds like a kind of like a INTJ ESFP dual sort of thing. So that really interests me.
Okay.
But definitely want to touch on all or as many aspects we can. I don't know how long this will take exactly. So
Okay. Yeah. We'll try to cover some of the major looking stuff, at least from what I'm seeing. So the North Node is this little symbol right here. It looks like a pair of headphones, kind of.
mhm.
And you can see it's in the sign of Gemini, the very start of the sign, actually. Um, and it's also in the eighth house because the houses move in this direction. Okay. This is the line for the eighth house. So if you've got the north node in Gemini in the eighth house, then that means that the south node, which is always 180 degrees away, is early Capricorn, or sorry, Sagittarius, right here where Mars is, and also kind of close to Uranus in the second house. The second house is always the opposite of the eighth. All right. Yeah, Sagittarius is always the opposite of Gemini. So if your north node is in Gemini in the eighth house, then it means that you have an evolutionary path that you have to fulfill where you're moving more towards a state of being a thinker, possibly also a communicator. Gemini relates to quite a few different themes, but all of them have to do with communication and mental agility and dexterity and quickness and adaptability. Um,
Hmm.
Gemini is a very sort of intellectual sign, but it's also kind of a very flighty sign in some ways. But we tend, when it's a North Node sign, we tend to attribute more positive aspects to it because the North Node is showing how you need to grow and what you need to balance yourself. The
So
South Node shows what you already have that's developed, but can also become a huge trap for you.
So it's kind of like you said, like you kind of need to be dexterous and kind of make decisions on a go. That definitely sounds like an SE hero Dom sort of thing, like an ESFP is kind of like what I
Yes,
need to become more.
yes, but it also can just as easily be about your mental acuity and your ability to communicate clearly. And as we're about to see, it applies to things that are very I guess, un-ESFP in a lot of ways, because if it's in the eighth house is the scorpionic house. If anyone knows anything that's listening to this about astrology signs, basically, if it's the eighth house, that means it has to do with subject matter and behavior that is investigative and oriented towards taboo subject matter, psychology, in a lot of cases, some kind of spiritual pursuit too, but a dark one in a lot of cases. It also has to do with sex. We can actually get pretty explicit with this house, but basically, if it's Gemini and the eighth house together, that mental acuity applies to those sorts of subjects. See? And so you're trying to sort of activate your mental capacity, but it's in the realm of investigating and dissecting and peering into the depths of existence to understand things that are mysterious or to analyze things. And since it's Gemini, it's an air sign, it's a social sign. That also
Mhm.
tends to mean that you do that with people. So it's kind of a social approach to investigating and understanding things, which means you want to understand personality. Ta-da. You
Yeah.
want to understand other people and you want to interview them and kind of get down to the root of what makes them tick and kind of probe into them a lot. That's kind of what we're seeing with this north node here. On top of that, you've also got your moon.
So real quick, so since it's in the eighth house, is kind of like designates it's like more of like a psychology kind of learning the personal psychology of people. If it was like a different house, it'd be a different story.
Correct. So the houses denote the spheres of influence, the activities, or the behaviors, and they're all themed after signs. But because the houses rotate independently of the signs, they can be in any kind of different sign. So the Scorpionic house is only 1/12 of the time actually in Scorpio, say. In this case, you've got a Gemini one. And your moon is there too, which is another heavy indicator that this is an important place for you in terms of developing yourself. But that's not the whole story with the nodes. But first, let's cover the south node too, because it's really important to understand the reciprocal so that you have the story about what's going on with the north. The north node is a little bit of a blind spot for a lot of people because it's a developmental goal, but it's not necessarily something that you're inherently good at. Now, with your moon there, that's a little bit, less the case because you've got a pretty strong, what you could say planet. It's not a planet, obviously, but the moon represents your sort of inner emotional state and, how you give and receive emotional feedback and nurturing and things like that, and your sensitivities. So the north node's helped a little bit by that. It's not terribly close to it, but it's still in the same sign and house. So that's good. This little key right here actually is kind of interesting. That's Chiron. It's an asteroid. It represents the centaur in Greek mythology that was the healer by the same name. That's Chiron, Chiron. And if it's that close to the north node, there might be some tendency to need to develop a capacity to heal people with this ability to probe into them, almost like a therapist, but not necessarily. And the desire to help others with their psychological issues by talking to them one-on-one, like in a Gemini fashion, might actually be a big part of what you do. But yeah, so the south node is down here, and you can see that Mars is right where that would fall. It doesn't show it on this chart, but it is exactly right in that position, reflective 180 degrees from the other point. And the south node's in Sagittarius in the second house. And Sagittarius is the sign, along with Gemini, that represents learning and experiences and things like that, and how you kind of grow your worldview. And it also represents your ability to adapt in life in a lot of cases. But your south node there, it takes on at least an ambivalent quality, if not a somewhat negative one. Sagittarius is the sign of expansion and victory, but it's also the sign of mindless egotism, potentially. And it's also the sign of opinionation and sticking your foot in your mouth and always believing that you're right and that you have the right dogma to present to people. And if the south node is there, there's a real danger that sometimes you're going to force your opinions way too hard because you just have this orientation where you feel that you're right, you know that you're right, but sometimes it really creates a problem by the same token. And sometimes when it turns out that you're not right, obviously it can blow up in your face. Yeah, you've probably experienced that. If it's in the second house, that means that it kind of applies to, let's say, so the second house is having to do with your possessions. It has to do with the physical world around you in terms of how you kind of take ownership of it. That also has to do with your body and your personal abilities and talents and traits to a large extent. And so Sagittarius being kind of high on its own vapor, and also then being in the second house, applying it to what you consider to be your abilities and what you take ownership over, it can be a very belligerent kind of thing sometimes, where you really think that you're right and you really think that you have the ability to discern the truth above everybody else. And I'm sure a lot of INTJs can probably relate to this, but you have to be really, really careful with it.
Yeah, that sounds like TI down in the shadow in the Cynics file. I know you have like a different MBTI kind of typology system for yourself. We could definitely discuss that one day for sure.
Oh yeah.
But TI Cynics for an INTJ, it's like kind of like you think you're either right, and you can totally be wrong if you don't like verify that you're right because you look really stupid, or you could totally think that you're stupid and like you're like inferior to other people because you think you're like we're dumb.
Yeah, and so you can kind of see a duality there with the south node, where sometimes it's really overbearing and it's going way too far, and other times there's also kind of like a sense that there's not enough there. Maybe there's a problem there. You're having issues with it. Those are both sorts of things that can manifest in the south node. So that sounds exactly right. And the fact that Mars is right on top of it, literally, like, I mean, it's just like such a close conjunction. Look at that. Mars obviously represents your aggression and your passion and your instinct in life, your drive to do things. And so when it comes to being right or being found out to be wrong, or trying to force an opinion or trying to appear correct, there can be a lot of potential for explosive anger. You feel very passionately invested in being right. You feel very assured in yourself that you're correct about things, you know. And
Hmm.
so that can also present a sort of an issue there. If we wanted to get into like weird karmic descriptions of the nodes, we could talk about past lives and things, but I don't think it's necessary. That's enough of a description by itself.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Maybe like
Yeah,
somewhere down the road.
yeah. All
I
right.
had a
So
question that's a little off topic. I just kind of
yeah,
popped into my head. So Pluto was like discovered, I think it was 1947. So what
mhm,
did astrologers kind of calculate Pluto before it was even discovered? I know what you said the asteroid was on there, Chiron.
yeah, all that stuff. It's interesting, you know, there's theories that this stuff got named because it was sort of meant to be in quotations. The planetary rulers of some of these signs used to be different. So, for instance, now the modern astrologers think that Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio. They used to think it was Mars, which shared it with Aries, you know. So, and these asteroids, who knows how much stock you want to put on the asteroids? A lot of people say they're really good, but if this is all obviously very fuzzy, this is all just guesswork. So if people find that, for instance, Chiron has a big theme for them, then, you know, great, run with it. But it's just an asteroid. Who knows?
Yeah, there's stuff out and out like very deep space in our galaxy that's so much bigger than our solar system that's much bigger than Pluto. They don't have any other influence.
Well, for instance, I do know that some forms of astrology will actually use not just the individual stars and all the constellations. Like, for instance, Antares is like in Scorpio here, you know, they'll be like, oh, Antares point, that's like a point of extreme conflict and whatever. I also know that the galactic core is right here in Sagittarius or so, right about there. So that's the core of the galaxy right there when you look at the night sky or close to it. There's all kinds of different systems in astrology. Some will actually use divisions of all these signs that divide them up by important stars or groups of stars and give each sign slightly different flavors depending on where it falls in the sign. So there is that too. Some of them will just divide all the signs up into thirds and say, this is the purest part of the sign. This is the, you know, wishy-washy part of the sign. It's just kind of, most people don't find it terribly useful, but the stars and the galactic core and things like that are definitely interesting if you dig down into them.
Huh.
So,
Okay, and I know we talked a little bit before. I have a lot of cusp on my sign. That's kind of like where it's like going into like ending out of one sign and going into another. Is that pretty normal for most people, or
no, there's a very, very low chance that that's actually going to happen. Yours are very, very tight. I mean, if we look right here, for instance, like this one right here, trying to draw, it's not very easy, but that cusp looks really, really tight in terms of like the sign boundary. And so um, it's actually very unusual. If you think about it, there's probably less than a 1 in 30 chance that it's going to be that close. And you can also see that a lot of these house cusps are not that close. You can see that the houses actually vary by size, which is another issue that arises. Some people have whole signs swallowed by houses that don't even have cusps in them. I actually have that. Um, but when something's in the 29th degree of a sign, like I believe this one is, I believe that was what the case was with that. Um, it's in what we call, what is it called, a diacritical sign, something like that, placement, where it is in a state of transition, but it's stuck in a state of transition in your natal chart. It feels like it's between two worlds, and it's kind of sharing characteristics of both, but also has some friction, some problems because of that, potentially. Of course, you can also make a lot of good out of it too if you want.
so? What does it specifically say for me?
For if it's the ninth house on the cusp between Gemini and Cancer, it's, well, the ninth house is your travel, your experiences, learning, teaching, personal philosophies, your interaction with things like religious ideas and the law and other things that involve what you think is correct philosophically and in a literal sense. And so if that's between Gemini and Cancer, then sometimes it may be difficult to decide on a philosophy because you're tempted by two very different views on it. One is a view that is just about the data and sort of the rational side of things. The other one is a little bit more creative and feeling, a little bit more intuitive, you might say. So that could get a little dicey.
So it's kind of like we were talking about your ESTJ guy, which I'm gonna do a podcast with soon. He's kind of like the other side of the spectrum than I am, but I can be kind of on both.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a feeling probably that when you're trying to engage in fulfilling your metaphorical quest in life, which is something that the ninth house represents, that there is a feeling that you're kind of stuck between two worlds, or you're constantly transitioning, and it feels like you're not necessarily ever rooted in place, but that might also work to your advantage somehow.
How could that work to my advantage? It just kind of seems like I'm like always pushing and pulling with myself all the time, it seems like.
Well, think about the fact that that's a very rare trait, and that not a lot of people are going to have that kind of an approach to things. It gives you a very original perspective, and it also gives you a very original process in terms of how you approach what you learn and how you learn it. So that could definitely be helpful.
Okay.
And like, in every case when we're interpreting the stuff, it's always just what you make of it. And some aspects are more challenging or less challenging, but they can also be better for being more challenging. It just depends on how you handle it.
And I know you said the sun sign is just a fraction of this, but my sun sign is kind of on a cusp between Leo and Virgo. Could you
Yeah.
explain that a little bit?
So yeah, when you've got, especially when something, so usually when you're interpreting where heavenly bodies are in this chart, you take into consideration how big they actually look in the sky physically. They usually weight a lot of these things more or less close to being the same. So let's say the sun covers what they call an orb of 5 degrees on either side, be like right about there maybe. And so this is kind of the space, you might say, that the sun is taking up. It's not just an infinitesimal point right here like the house cusps are. It's an actual physical body in the sky. And so the when it's crossing over a sign cusp like this, or a house cusp, either way, is considered to be leaping into the next one, because its physical presence is actually over the line. And so some people will say, well, I feel like my sun is more the sign than the other one, and that's fine. But in most cases, it seems like it's actually going into the next sign, and that usually is the one that they identify more with. So I think you said before you identified more with Virgo as a conscious sort of ego force than Leo. And you definitely seem that way too when I talk to you. So
Yeah, it kind of seemed like I know like we were talking about this a little bit during the sun sign videos. I haven't released all of them yet, but we're kind of talking about how Leo's kind of known as like the gregarious, loud extrovert, but
yeah,
kind of just like someone has like an ambience towards them, right?
Leo is like an extreme attention seeker, center stage. Now it depends, of course, on the rest of their chart. Disclaimer, but yeah, in terms of how you seem to think and express yourself in a more conscious fashion, I don't see the Leo coming out in you. They tend to be a lot more bombastic in a lot of cases. You seem to
And
be much more the pensive, considerate Virgo, a little bit more studious, a little bit quieter and more considerate.
yeah, so they're almost like opposites in a lot of ways, right?
Sort of, yeah. Whenever a sign follows on the end of another, they usually have some kind of conflict with each other, and yet they rely on each other for their evolution. We could do a whole series on just moving through the wheel. We already did all the signs, and I described that a little bit, but
Okay, yeah, well, I'll just let you take the lead. I'm just trying to think of stuff as I go.
yep. And so we're going to analyze all these individual parts as far as I see it, and we'll try to combine them. All right. So we've discussed the south and the north node. We discussed the sun and the moon. The moon is going to have an emotional attachment to darker subject matter, and also a very cool and distanced intellectual feel to it, because it's a Gemini, which is an intellectual sign. It's not known for being super touchy feely, maybe social, but not super sensitive. Um, and then over here, we've got Venus and Mercury. And these, believe it or not, might actually be the heart of your chart. And the reason for that is that the north node here is in the 8th house, and the 8th house technically starts right here in Taurus. Unlike planets, they don't jump over the line like this. That's not what happens. All right. They are mathematical points, and so usually they're considered to be in the sign that it actually shows them in, even though it might be really close. Unless they're in the 29th degree, which it doesn't look like this one is. Could be. But so if it's Taurus and your north node is in that 8th house, Then the eighth house here is ruled by Venus. And here is Venus right here. There are different ways of doing rulerships, okay? Sometimes people do rulerships by the sign that something is in, and then it would just automatically be Mercury, but in this case, it doesn't matter because Mercury is right here anyway. I go by houses because it seems like it's been more accurate for me. But since your north node is ruled by Venus in this case, and Venus is in this house, the 11th.
Wait, hold on. You said Venus is in my north node, but that was Gemini, I thought.
North node, 8th house cusp is in Taurus.
Okay.
And so Taurus relates to Venus. Venus is the Taurus planet.
Oh, it represents Venus. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And so what happens is with these rulerships, you get a bridge. You get a bridge to another place where a planet lies. So it's ruled by Venus. Venus is in the 11th house, and the 11th house cusp itself is in Virgo. Okay. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is already right here, so that's where the chain ends. We call that the final dispositor for the north node. There can be a huge long chain of these rulerships, by the way. It can bounce all over the chart like crazy. Mine is actually like 5 or 6 long, and then there's like 2 at the end. But Mercury is your final dispositor because it's in its own sign with its own house cusp. So why does this matter? Well, the ruler of the north node describes how you are going to embody and actualize the qualities and goals of the north node. The north node often needs some help in that regard because it is a blind spot and it is a developmental and aspirational sort of a place. You're trying to reach towards it, but it's not necessarily easy to do it, right? You want to be more social, you want to engage in more investigation with people, but it's not necessarily easy. Well, the Venus and Mercury here are going to give us an idea of how you can do it. So since they're both in Virgo in the 11th house, that means that they are both very detail oriented and very, what do I want to say, very, very practical. They're very perfectionistic. They're very driven by a sense of needing to work on things actively every day in life. Since it's Mercury and Venus, they're both highly relational, okay? And they both also relate to earthier things too, but they both have to do with actualizing your relational potential and abilities, but in a work-oriented way in the 11th house.
So it's kind of like a workaholic kind of thing. That could be like something like that.
It could be, but since they're connected to the north node, it takes on a more positive meaning of just being very astute and hardworking and being very devoted to what it is you're trying to achieve. You know, you're always perfecting ideas. You're always, and you tend to be very, shall we say, tolerant and mild-mannered towards the people that you're interacting with, which kind of helps them bring out their own inner qualities. But since it's in the 11th house and the 5th house are things I see in INTJ charts all the time. The 11th house is the house of societal change and inventiveness and trying to make the world a better place through intellectual endeavors and social initiatives. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to investigate other people and you're trying to do it in a way that's data driven and practical and logical, but it's in order to help society somehow or change the world for the better, then that is effectively what you're trying to do by understanding personality and how it pushes and pulls on things like, say, mental problems or emotional defenses or psychological disorders and things like that.
Okay, like I mentioned before, I have a avoidant personality disorder. Does that come up in the chart anywhere? Like, is this like a part of it, or is that somewhere else possibly?
Avoidant personality disorder. Yes, I think so in some ways. It might actually be a blessing in disguise, because if you are trying to take any kind of a social angle, and this is a very heavily social north node instead of rulers and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You also have to keep a certain distance from the people that you're studying and working with so that you can actually do something that helps them You know, a lot of people who study things and discover new things about them have to maintain a certain distance from their subjects, emotionally at least, right? And maybe your avoidant personality disorder is actually avoidant personality bonus or avoidant personality capability. In other words, you're able to treat with people and you're able to engage in your mission in trying to understand them better and then try to help the world by understanding people. But you also are able to keep enough of a distance to be objective and rational, like Virgo.
So I don't know if Len Ferry got her mic written or up for this, but she's a social worker and kind of in that field. That's kind of exactly what you need to do. You kind of like need to help people, but you need to kind of detach emotionally from people.
Yeah, I think her mic is still not working in Zoom. That's okay. Why you there?
Is this thing actually working?
So that's pretty common in a social work and behavioral health. They're kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. That's something that you have to find, like we talked about a little bit, I think, in the group podcast we did. Like you're able to kind of give like objective feedback, but not really get emotionally attached.
Well, there are different modalities in therapy, and it kind of depends on what theory you're utilizing. So I actually just had supervision today where we were discussing different modalities of therapy. And in a lot of them, like cognitive behavioral therapy, solution focused therapy, you're not really part of the system, or you don't view yourself as part of the system. You're supposed to be this objective, observer, and you're just kind of being like, oh, what's going on here and what's happening over there, and can you expand a little bit about that? Whereas family systems therapy, especially if you are a fan of Minution, probably saying that wrong, you actually involve yourself very heavily in the family system, and you do like align, at least temporarily, with one person or the other in order to disrupt the family system, and you view yourself as another member of that family system, at least on a temporary basis, in order to disrupt it. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're working like one-on-one on an individual, you are very much more objective. But if you're like working within a system, then you are more a part of that system.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but I think thank you, Landry.
Yeah.
I think that you mentioned before that you worked with autistic children. Is that right?
Yeah,
I did. Oh,
Well, you both did.
actually, we both did.
And I was
Yeah.
also an autistic child, so we're three of a kind.
There we go.
But yeah, so and Venus Mercury being so close together, boy, you merge a lot of different styles of relating to people into a single sort of approach. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily avoidant. I would say that you're careful, and I would say that you're also able to maintain what we might call a therapeutic distance or a researcher's kind of distance. Because in the 11th house also, it's a place of detachment from basically the entire world. The 11th house is kind of like you have a special group of people that you're a part of, and you all contribute things to a greater mission or vision for the world's betterment. But you're also removed from society, like a group of scientists researching something really esoteric, or government counselors who all have special like interest areas, but they don't necessarily have anyone else they can relate it to except people in the government that they're trying to advise. It's that kind of an energy. So those are the rulers of the North Node for you there. And so basically, in order to be able to become closer to people and to be able to relate to them more intensively and to understand them better, as seems to be a big part of your mission, you've got to basically develop this side of you that is very relationally expressive, but is definitely very detached and very rational at the same time. And you shouldn't let that bother you if that's how you relate to people. It's a developing feature. It's not a bug in the system. In other words, your avoidant personality disorder may have been nothing more than an undeveloped portion of something that's actually going to be very good and important for you.
And you said that's pretty common in charts for INTJs, right?
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of INTJs with a lot of 11th and 5th house stuff. Those are the Leo and Aquarius houses. I've also seen a lot of INTJs with Leo and Aquarius just as signs. They also often have at least something in Scorpio, if not something major in Scorpio, which we can get to. Um, yeah, boy. Trying to see. Now, can we see, is that ascendant? It looks like it's at 0 degrees, something in Scorpio. Is that right? This thing right
Yeah,
here?
that's the rising sign, right? I always
Yeah.
thought I was a Scorpio rising, but I guess it's on the cusp of Libra and Scorpio.
If it's on 0 something something in Scorpio, then it's just in Scorpio basically at that point. Um, and it also has Pluto right on top of it for double the Scorpio fun. Um, and that gives you basically just a very, oh, and boy, we got Saturn here too. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. So Scorpio and Capricorn relate to Pluto and Saturn. Those two signs and sets of planets, they're considered kind of the bad guys of the zodiac. When you've got Scorpio rising, you tend to be very perceptive and you tend to have a sort of aura about you that may put people off because they're not entirely sure what's going on with you, but they can sense something about you that's different. There might be a sort of magnetic pull or repulsion. And the way that you approach things tends to be like you're dissecting them all the time. You're always trying to peer deeper. It's not necessarily something you're always consciously doing. It's just part of how you naturally operate. It's just how you do things. The first house is not exactly just the house of identity, although it's pretty close. It's the house of the individual self. It's also how you take action and how you are presented and what you look like as an individual. And so when you're approaching people or when they approach you, you might actually seem either very threatening or at the very least kind of almost sour in a way. You might also seem very enlivening too, but it depends on who it is. Some people might really be attracted to the way that you do things and other people might be repulsed. That's the kind of thing that you're getting since Pluto's right on the cusp. I mean, it's basically like getting hit with that energy like a hammer in the face. And since Saturn's in there too, Saturn is the planet of limitation and constriction, and it's not bad. It's not actually bad. Saturn is also about how you build things of meaning in your life over long periods of time, how you mature yourself. Saturn will actually intentionally make things worse and constricted in order to make sure that they end up being stronger in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that you approach things can be very baleful to people. They can be very threatened by it, can seem overly draconian. It can seem overly, I don't even want to say tyrannical, but it's getting close to that. On the positive side, though, it can also be very perceptive. It can be very imaginatively and psychically penetrating to the point where people don't even know how you know certain things that you know. And with Saturn there, it takes on the tone of wanting to sort of project law and order and structure into the world, not to be the bad guy, although you will look like the bad guy sometimes, but in order to make the world better around you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, and you you probably have had experiences with that too.
For sure, yeah. Because like when I was kind of like looking at astrology a little bit on my own, I definitely didn't go this far in depth. It's like the Leo Sun and Scorpio rising is like just a huge like dichotomous in nature. It's like super like contrasting.
Yeah.
So like the Leo's about having an aura about you that's kind of like positive, and the Scorpio's kind of like mysterious and kind of even negative in a lot of ways, right?
It's, well, to medieval people and people who lived before that with the zodiac, the scorpion was considered very, very frightening. It was almost always considered with an early death. They always thought that it meant you'd have health problems or some kind of like heinous, like someone would come and assassinate you or poison you or something. Or there'd be like, some horrible disease that you would inherit, stuff like that. It's not really true. It does relate to those subjects, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. Scorpio is a sign of loss, but guess what? It's also the sign of power and domination. Scorpio is a sign of destruction, but it's also the sign of rebirth and revitalization. So it really just depends on how you look at it and how you handle it. It is something that people don't understand. It's also the sign of mystery, so it's inherently hard for us to understand it sometimes, but it's not bad. It just represents forces in nature in the universe that people don't feel comfortable with, and that's just part of the nature of it.
That's like one thing I heard about NI DOMs. I don't know if it's true, and hopefully I don't have it, but like NI DOMs will often get these rare diseases like, or like just diseases in general, but they're able like to fight them off and keep going because like NI is just like such strong willpower. So that could kind of like resonate there possibly.
Yeah, and that may very well be. My dad was an INTJ, and he got a rare disease, but he died from it. So, not to hypnotize anyone into thinking that's going to happen to them. It's different for everybody. It just depends. He was also predisposed to some things and had a very specific exposure to stuff. So, but the first house in some ways relates to your health. I wouldn't say it's the house of health. That's more the second house, the eighth house, and the sixth house in a lot of cases. We can get into that some other time. Okay, so that's kind of the basic elements of what's going on in this chart. We've obviously got more planets down here, but they're not as important to the story, at least that I can see. Let's see here.
This is probably
So everybody's wondering what these crazy lines all over the chart are that are going all over the place, right? So as you can see, some are red and some are blue. We've even got little green dotted ones. Those are minor aspects. We don't really care about those as much. So let's just go after the big ones. So the moon is opposite Neptune and Jupiter. All right. See this?
mm-hmm.
No. Now, does that mean anything? It might. Usually when you see an opposition, it's not inherently bad. There could be some friction, but it also means that they have a partnering energy with each other. They share opposite ideas and opposite viewpoints, but they can also work together to achieve a much bigger goal. So Moon and Gemini, Neptune and Jupiter, for all intents and purposes, are basically in Capricorn. It's a very loose opposition. You know, this moon's not that close to the end of Gemini. These two are like into the next sign here. Should actually be like right here. That's okay. We'll say it's pretty much opposite those two things. When you have a moon opposition, there's a tug of war between your emotional state and whatever else is on the other side, but they can also have a really good productive partnership by the same token if you manage it well. And if it's Neptune and Jupiter, so Neptune is the planet where you express your need to sort of merge into the greater universe and sacrifice for some spiritual or emotional goal. It's a very empathic planet. It's a very imaginative planet. It's also where you undo yourself and basically kind of, in many cases, accidentally unravel your own being. So, and with Jupiter, Jupiter is the planet of expansion and optimism and seeking new horizons and things like that. Since it's right on top of Neptune, those two things merge. And basically you have an extreme enthusiasm for sacrificing for some greater goal, something that you find high-minded, but also to be the great work of your life, because these are in Capricorn. And when they're in Capricorn, I mean, this is going into the next sign, you know, it's the cusp thing again. When it's in Capricorn, they take on the personality of wanting to do a great work or build something truly momentous and important in life and the world that's going to impact something structural about the world and improve it. And they're in the third house too, right here.
What is the third house representing in?
The third house is the Gemini house. So all the things that we described about Gemini become activities and behaviors. So the third house is your community of people, your superficial, I say superficial, it sounds negative, it's not, but it is superficial relationships, the way that you, it's also the way that you think, it's your thought patterns. It is the way that you wheel and deal and barter in life. It's the way that you learn, okay? But it's book learning. It's also the way that you write. It's the house of writing, house of communication, also the house of teaching. You see how that ties into communities and socializing and speaking and all that stuff. So if that's all going on in Capricorn, it takes on an air of seriousness. Capricorn wants to apply itself to accomplish things that actually matter. It doesn't mess around, but it can also be a tough position because anything in Capricorn also tends to start at the bottom of the mountain and have to work its way to the top over a very long period of time by honing its skills through painful failures.
Yeah.
So if all of that is opposite your moon and you have this sort of joyous need to sacrifice for building something important in the realm of learning and community, then sometimes it's going to strike you as being very emotionally painful. Your need to do something momentous and potentially also to sacrifice yourself for it may not always mesh very well with the emotional reality that you're experiencing. But the good news is that they also are complementary in some ways here. So that deep emotional state that you tend to have, that's very intellectual, but also very, very deep. It's once again, it's the Gemini 8th house moon. And if the moon's in the 8th house, your emotions tend to be very intense in their expressions. They tend to be in realms that are a little bit darker compared to what a lot of people are used to. And interestingly enough, Lanferia has the exact same moon position, just about. It's not only in Gemini, but also in the 8th house. You can be very passionate, but also very detached. In some cases, you might not even know what your emotional state even is. And this enthusiasm and this planet of unconsciousness and self-undoing may actually make that even worse, because it makes you even more unconscious, given that they're in this relationship together, about your feelings. And since it's in the same place that your North Node is, this moon, and the fact that it's opposing these two things, might actually really need some kind of work or attention of some kind that would help you develop yourself a lot. Psychological work and psychosocial kinds of work, maybe with a trusted person or a therapist or something, not even because you necessarily have emotional problems, but rather because you are a person for whom understanding yourself emotionally is very beneficial, but also might be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that really sums up FI child altogether. Just like we
Yeah.
feel really deep emotions. We're actually emotional very deep down, but we don't always understand or display our emotions, and we kind of suppress it.
But let me also just go out on a limb here and say that FI child for an INTJ is a very, it's very willing to push this sense of self-sacrifice and trying to build something important in life with its value system represented by the emotions. Is that right?
Yeah. I just filmed a video on FI that's going to come out next month sometime. And pretty much I do talk about that. It's like kind of like a moral compass for us, kind of like we're good or bad people, basically. It steers us through life, really, once we
That's
develop
right.
it.
And is it often difficult in some ways, or is it often confusing?
Yeah, it's really difficult for us because we see like making emotional decisions is just stupid, kind of like ENTJs do.
Yeah,
It just we got to be very rational and straight to the point. If we get emotional, then we kind of kick ourselves in the ass. Like, why are you being a big wuss, basically? Especially male INTJs. I think females might have a little better in that aspect because they're kind of bred to be more emotional.
maybe. Yeah, maybe. Maybe someday we can look at Obliquity's chart. She might be willing to do that. She might even be willing to just throw in her own analysis of it. But basically, this moon being opposite these two things, it's like the moon is inherently wrapped up in this sort of drama where it's like you really want to be able to make, I guess you could say, the right sacrifices and to have that important impact on human thought in general. And the feelings play into it inherently because they're in this balance together, but that doesn't mean that they agree necessarily. They're just complementary. And so you're always going to have this inner tension. But once again, let's venture to make the connection. It's not a bad thing. It's a feature. It's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It has internal friction in some ways, but it's also really important and unique. So it's part of what you have to offer. That FI could be really, really important in a lot of ways to what you're doing, obviously. A lot of INTJs have seen that. So
And I know we talked a little bit about like Capricorn. Maybe it was in this house in this position. I can't remember exactly, but it's kind of like Murphy's law. Like if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Is that the case here?
Capricorn is one of those things. It's a lot like Scorpio in that regard, where they're very kind of like a wet blanket in some ways. They can be very funny, but they're also very dour. And the reason that they're very dour is that they're like, you've got to take this seriously, damn it. If you don't take this seriously, then X, Y, or Z bad thing is going to happen because I've seen it. You got to listen to me.
That's like in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's very, very cautious and wary of things in life because it knows how dangerous reality can be, and it knows that the rules suck, and when you violate them you get hurt, potentially killed. So it's very, very serious about that.
Yeah. So is it pretty common for, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I have like nothing in these 4 houses right here.
Oh yeah, it's very common for people to have empty houses and signs. It's not that you don't have expressions of those. It's just that you don't particularly often express yourself through the lens of the sign or in the areas represented by the houses.
So that's Taurus, Aries, Aquarius, and I don't remember what that one is.
Pisces.
Pisces. Okay.
And if you have very low energy in those places, then you're not going to be very directly aggressive with any of your planets. You're not going to be like really sensual and grounded and stubborn with a lot of them. You're not going to be uh, a hippie, for lack of a better descriptor. And Aquarius is a very social sign, but it's also a very like hot and cold kind of social sign. So it's kind of the sign of egalitarianism and brotherhood. It's a social
Yeah.
one though.
That's
Yeah.
more like the INFJ side of the spectrum, it seems like.
A little bit. I've seen a lot of INTJs with heavy placements in Aquarius as well. It just depends. Yours are in the 11th house. There's a lot of overlap between houses and signs that share a common theme. So you've got some pretty heavy Aquarian energy. It's just in the 11th house instead of the sign.
So I have Aquarian energy in 11th house, even though it's in Virgo.
That's correct. It's just that the personality that it's expressed with is a Virgoan personality with these two planets that are in it. It's expressed through Aquarian activities and spheres of influence, which gives it a sort of esoteric flair. You're going for ideas and inventiveness and social change that are a little bit more forward thinking. The 11th house is the house of forward thinking, literally, inventiveness and progress.
So if you were to do like a chart on a sensor, would it be kind of the opposite of mine in a lot of ways, you'd think?
In
Or
some
have you-
ways, well, like for instance, the ESTP in your server, who I will not mention here in case he does not want to be mentioned, but he had a north node in Taurus and it was in the 5th house, I believe, somewhere right about there. And his 5th house is right here. So this was in the 7th, this would have been number 5. And if that's the case, and then his ruler was over in like Libra and it was like a bunch of social planets in a social house or something. That already sounds more like an extroverted sensor, right? He has a sort of natural theme to his north node, and it's in the 5th house, which means massive center of attention and expressiveness. And look at me jumping around doing tricks. And but for him, it's a good thing. He needs to do it. And then it was in a very social place. So the way that he tends to realize that is always by being the heart of the party, always talking to people, always finding new people to talk to constantly. It's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I remember we did my son's too. I think he's going to be either an ESFP or ESTP. Was it pretty similar to this one person we're talking about?
Yeah, there were a lot of similarities between him and the other ESTP, and also between Teddy Roosevelt, who was also an ESTP.
Yeah.
So it's something that like you have to do this for like a really long time before you start seeing the big collection of things that might be similar to each other. It's not super direct when you're looking. It's not necessarily going to be super obvious, but there are definite commonalities.
Okay.
So, and the last thing of note to mention here is this giant ugly red line here. The reason that that's important is that if you look, these are the rulers associated with your north node. These, particularly the Mars, ruler of the, it's on the south node. Yep. So the south node is right here where Mars is. These are in a fairly close square to the rulers of your north node. What does it mean? It means that there's a lot of antagonism between where you're coming from and where you're going. And they might cause a lot of problems for each other. The things that you're naturally good at and that you feel very confident about over here, in terms of how you know you're right and your opinion and your abilities and all that stuff, and potentially anger, may in a lot of cases really harm your desire and your need to have the relationships that you need to advance. And since it's the south node is right here, it's directly squaring these things. When you fall back into that, it like feels like it's a regression back into like, your own personal Stone Age almost. And it can happen in an instant, obviously. This is a very delicate thing you're trying to build here. And like you said, avoidant personality, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I just think that the way that you relate to people is unique. But these positions over here can really antagonize that. Now, it can be very, very negative, or it can be very positive. It can be a catalyst for growth. If you find that you're having a lot of internal conflicts and strife and like issues with anger, or like your own personal drive to do what you want to do versus where you feel like you should actually be going and trying to relate to people, whatever, really what it is a call to try to mend these two things and find a way for them to coexist peacefully so that they don't tear you apart.
So it's like really dichotomous again. Like there's a lot of push pull in my chart. It seems like, right? A lot of stuff.
Yeah, lots of push pull, lots of weird transitionary liminal states where you're not sure which one you're in. You could say a lot of paradoxes, which is something that's often associated with INTJs.
Yeah, like I said before, like I was born almost a month or over a month late. I think I was at least like about 30 days or so. So I guess I was born at this time for a reason.
Perhaps. We always say that there's a reason that everybody has the chart they do. But other than that stuff, that's just a really basic overview. I mean, this isn't super in depth, but were there any questions you wanted to ask?
So like the personal relationship is kind of like where I need to get over the avoidant thing and kind of
I
not.
would say utilize the avoidant thing. That sounds really strange. I think that if you fight against it too much, you're going to be disappointed, because I think it's just the way that you inherently relate. Look, you got these two massive relating planets coming off of a North Node blind spot that you're trying to develop over an entire lifetime. It's not easy.
Mhm.
And it's in a social sign, okay? But it's in the 8th house, which makes it a little bit stranger than your normal, like average, like person at a cocktail party, right? I mean, you're not going to be like the normal kind of social. And with these two things in Virgo, it's again a kind of a reticent, almost. I mean, the 8th house is very secretive, but Virgo is a somewhat reserved energy. Okay, the water and earth signs in general are less extroverted, more introverted, and reflective and receptive. With that much of your socialization tied up in Virgo, you're just inherently going to be a quieter person around other people, but that does not mean that you do not have a strong relating style. It's just different from other people's. And especially since it's in the 11th house, that's going to be expressed through all kinds of weird, quirky things and approaches. That doesn't make it bad. It just means that that's how you have to do things. And in fact, that's kind of how you're trying to realize your potential, because that is exactly how you're going to understand and probe into people enough to start understanding them so that you can build bigger systems that help the rest of the world and advance our understanding of human psychology.
And you like, just so like people know, like before you even knew about like me, like even like I had this channel and stuff, like you were saying this kind of stuff before I even told you like what I was trying to do with like the psychology and my channel and all that, right?
Yeah. Well, given that your North Node is in the house of psychology, big surprise, and your moon is also pretty close.
Yeah, just so
So,
people don't say like, well, he's just kind of like doing a cold reading where, or he's like, well, you're into psychology, so this is like so and so. But Zeon was saying this before he even knew about all this stuff about me, really.
oh, and of course, again, the Pluto, Scorpio, rising complex here. Again, just a very psychological approach to everything in life. You ooze it out of your pores. You seem like you have this sort of like dark, glittering aura around you. So,
Like a bad thing, or
no, it could be good or bad. It just depends. So,
everything's pretty subjective.
now, one thing, I guess, another thing is that this North Node being in the second house technically starts in Scorpio. So that means its ruler is this Pluto. So that's something to watch out for. The ruler of the South Node is potentially a gremlin in the system. So while you are trying to develop things in the realm of psychology with your North Node, you have to be careful about how intensively you approach people or situations to do it. This right here will help with that, because it gives you a much more sort of reasonable, non-threatening Virgo energy to approach it with. And the 11th house is kind of like a social, like activities. It's like quirky social activities. So if you can focus on this stuff, it'll help a lot.
So like I have kind of a lot of interest that a lot of people don't have, which is kind of been detrimental to me. So to kind of pursue those, and that's where I would like to be able to connect with people. Is that what you're trying to
Yeah. And what do you mean by detrimental? Just the fact that people don't connect with you?
I think like INTJs in general, we have like a handful of interests, hobbies that we kind of pursue. So like kind of we have our tunnel vision and
Yeah,
everything else doesn't
definitely. Yeah,
matter. Yeah.
definitely. I've seen that with a lot of INTJs, including my dad.
Yeah.
But and this is something I actually had to encourage him to do as an INTJ as well. I kept saying, hey, I don't know why you feel so down on the things that you're particularly narrowly interested in, because those are the very things that I think you could actually make into something valuable. And before he died, he didn't do it. I mean, he was really into politics, he was really into history and a lot of stuff, but he knew a lot of things about those that nobody else knew. He had perspectives that were very inventive and very far-sighted. And if only he had developed that stuff more, I think that he could have made a really valuable contribution with it. I mean, I guess he'd also just run out of time, but
Yeah. You said he died what, like 57, I think you said?
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's a shame.
And so I think that, and INTJs and ENTJs share this in common, where the social world's values are absolutely not what we are. And it's very hard in a lot of ways to operate in the world because we're so different. And then we end up sometimes kind of really obscuring what we should have been doing as individuals. And so it's like, maybe this is a caution. Definitely go after those weird pursuits. Definitely go after your own style of human interaction and working through ideas. It's
So
important.
basically don't conform. I mean, INTJs generally don't conform very well.
Yeah, you can take a somewhat polite and gentle approach with Virgo, but don't conform. 11th house is absolutely against conformity. You're trying to change things. You're trying to make insights. You're trying to go somewhere different. So do it.
And that's INTJ land for you.
Yep. And it's always a tension between trying to do something that you think is actually relevant, rational, that you feel driven to do, that's more immediately practical versus following your own path, trying to do it in your own strange but potentially very important and useful way. So
We might have talked about this, but I don't remember talking about Uranus. What's that all about?
you want to talk about Uranus? All right. I kind of glossed over it because I was trying to pay attention to the more important stuff, but Uranus is the Aquarian planet, you could say. So wherever Uranus is, that's where you're going to express your capability to have drastic and sudden changes in your life that may surprise even you as they come out of you. It's also a place that's social, but it's a rebellious planet. It's not like the other two social planets. Mercury is a little bit of a trickster sometimes. Venus just wants to get along. Uranus likes relating to people, but oftentimes through being sort of a contrasting, like a contrarian kind of an energy. This is where you express your need for freedom and rebellion and individuality. You won't appreciate being confined wherever Uranus is expressing itself. And so since it's in the second house with the South Node and Mars, once again, this lends even more strength to the South Node being potentially extremely volatile, not to mention aggressive and wanting to fight against other people whenever it feels offended by anything anyone else thinks, or if its ideas aren't being respected because it's in Sagittarius and its opinions are always right, don't forget. And it's in the second house of I own this is mine, and you shut up. Potentially, that's how bad it can get. And so with these two planets so close together, with the South Node being right here, in this case, Uranus being so independent and rebellious, kind of like a punk, at the mall or something. It's potentially just very, very strong and stubborn on the whole, I'm right, you have to shut up. And never wanting to be tied down by anyone else's opinions or ideas, ever, 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 incredibly aggressive, incredibly independent, but also potentially going to get you in trouble. Now, the South Node is not inherently bad. These two things being here isn't inherently bad. It can just get you in trouble if you're not careful, because it's very overbearing. So you are often probably very correct. You are often probably instinctively and intellectually on the mark with your opinions and ideas and visions. You probably do have very strong abilities in that area. You just have to be careful, try to modulate it with a little bit more discussion and consideration and investigation on the other side.
Yeah, that makes too much sense.
Most INTJs have that kind of an issue I've seen. So
So what advice would you give to an INTJ that's struggling with this? Has something similar going on, maybe in their charts or just in general?
yeah, I was going to say based on the chart or based on the personality, because I could do either or both.
I mean, just I guess in general, or
Um,
or chart wise. I guess we'll say chart wise since we're doing a astrology theme here today.
chart wise for you specifically here, a lot of INTJ charts have a very heavy element of needing to innovate and push things forward, but they also just need a lot of humility. And that's not a criticism. It's just you're a very strong character and you can be very frightening to other people. And you can be very stubborn and you can be incredibly wildly independent, aggressively independent to the point that you'll actually physically attack people sometimes. I don't know if you've ever done that, but I've seen some INTJs do it because they just get so fed up and it's basically like a pressure cooker and it explodes.
Mm-hmm.
My dad actually took a guy that was a bully to him in high school and picked him up by the scruff of the neck and the pants, and he rammed his head into a locker and gave him a concussion because he just had so much crap thrown at him for so long. He finally exploded.
Yeah.
And so there's a need to relieve this like pressure that can build up. So like find ways to cope with it before it becomes a problem. At the same time, humility in the sense that you're willing to be open and listen to others, which thankfully with NI hero, in some ways you actually are. You just have to tweak it so that you're more willing to do that with other people and really consider what they're saying before just shutting them down with your own opinions. Because even though you may know better, there may still be some details and facets you haven't considered. You just have to be very careful with that dichotomy of I'm right versus actually trying to gather information, actually trying to probe into things to find more ideas and to innovate.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense why I kind of use judo as a coping mechanism, because I just always want to slam people on the ground, but I never
See, that's
did.
good. And that might work for you really well. So as a way, these two here, this Mars and Uranus and Sagittarius is being expressed through your body, second house. Second
Mhm.
house is your body. And so if you can find a sort of physical release valve for that, that's actually good. Just as long as you don't actually go around killing people
Yeah.
like Batman or something. I mean, Batman's pretty controlled, but he doesn't seem to want to be all the time.
And most of his incantations, he's been an INTJ as well, ironically enough.
Yeah, yep.
Maybe
Best
not.
superhero because he has all that internal friction. It seems like his internal drama is almost more important than the external one, but they interact and it's really interesting.
Yeah. Maybe not so much the 60s Adam West Batman.
Yeah, I don't know what he would be. That's goofy.
Yeah.
It's goofy as hell.
All right. I'm sure I'll have a ton of questions once I exit this meeting out, but that's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, it's gone long enough. We could dive into these way more deeply, but that's what we have time for. So
Maybe we could do a continuation sometime.
okay.
Oops, I don't hit upgrade. Lan, you've been kind of quiet for most of the video. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? I know it wasn't really about you, but
Well, I would just say that, in general, what I would tell anyone who comes in and we talk about, strengths and weaknesses, that often people's greatest strengths are where you also see a lot of people's weaknesses and vice versa. So if you're hearing about like, oh, these are the places that you're weak in, or this is like where you kind of fail, usually just take that kind of stuff and use it as constructive criticism. So that's what I would tell anybody with like looking at anyone's chart is just, don't walk away from it thinking like, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff to develop, and I'm, failing here or there. So like, for example, talking about how, you may have more select interests, but really those can be windows into forming really deeper, meaningful relationships with other people,
Yes.
as opposed to flitting about, in the social realm and not really making any deep, meaningful connections. I mean, all of my really deeper friendships came from, I would say, more my niche areas of interest. So, my more like nerdier interest, or where like I got all my friend groups from. How I met Bob was having a conversation about game design, So that's
Yeah.
where you should like lean into it.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think like INTJs in general, small talk just drives us up the wall. So we have to talk about something really specific or something very theoretical.
Yeah, Virgo is a very specific sign. Those two planets are very social, so you don't really want to talk about things that aren't in a more narrow interest for you, you know? And that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody have anything else?
No, not right now.
All right. Well, hope all you stay tuned for all that. I hope it wasn't too dense and too fast for you. But yeah, we definitely are talking about doing like celebrity astrology readings and stuff for people that are more well known than I am, and kind of see if we can find a correlation between their charts and type. One of the biggest proponents we were talking about last time was Kurt Cobain, who's very INFJ-ish, and his chart reflects that, as we were discussing in the other video, which you guys should check out. So with that being said, thank you for going on a clickbait and have a great day.